Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Q&A Live, a special segment brought to you by the NeuroNoodle podcast. I'm your host, Pete Jansons, and today we're sharing a live recording from a recent Q&A session where our expert panel tackled real-time questions from our audience on neurofeedback, brain health, and mental well-being. At NeuroNoodle Q&A Live, you drive the content. You ask, we answer. Our expert panel includes Jay Gunkelman, neurofeedback legend with over 500,000 brain scans analyzed, Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds and a leading expert in neuroscience and psychology, Joy Lunt, neurofeedback specialist focusing on autism and sensory processing disorders, John Mekrut, advocate for neurofeedback, particularly in PTSD and mental health, Dr. Andrew Hill, founder of Peak Brain Institute, Santiago Brand, international leader in biofeedback and neurofeedback, and of course Anthony Ramos, neurofeedback practitioner and mental health advocate. If you'd like to be part of the conversation and drive the next session's content, join us live every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time on the NeuroNoodle YouTube channel. It's your chance to get direct answers from the experts, just like in the recording. Disclaimer, the content provided in this Q&A is for informational entertainment purposes only. Always consult with your primary care physician or a qualified healthcare provider before making any decisions related to your health. Now let's dive into NeuroNoodle Q&A Live. Sit back, listen, and learn. Yeah, you're talking about the Guardian helmets. Supposedly, each person that wears it, 10% on the hitter and 10% on the hittee to reduce concussions.
Yeah.
So why doesn't Tua wear one?
Well, vanity, probably.
Yeah, because existing helmets look so good.
Yeah, well, they got the cool stuff on the side with the flames, or whatever. I don't like. There was a whole discussion about the evolution of helmets. And it used to be just, some leather thing that guys put on their head when they finally decided to wear helmets. And all of a sudden somebody said, this is a great marketing idea. We put the name of the team on the side, promote, boosterism, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, all right, that was the evolution. So now we have this helmet, and the new helmet doesn't allow for that because it's got these bumps in it. So it's not as cool looking.
Well, Tua Tagovailoa, Anthony Ramos, however you say it, he has done a lot for the mental health field for us because the traffic that pours in when people want to see what a fencing posture looks like. Does anyone want to take on what that means? When you get a jolt to the head. Now, I've heard there's posturing where you kind of freeze up like this, and then there's the on guard.
Yeah,
pose.
asymmetric tonic motor reflex, ATMR. It's a childhood reflex that's there up until about age. I think it vanishes between 9 months of age and a year of age. It's very similar to the Babinski reflex, the foot scratch, reflex that changes as the nervous system hits a developmental milestone. And if it shows up later in life, big things have gone awry. You don't want to see a positive Babinski sign. That means you have a significant, central nervous system issue. Probably in this case, you're probably getting compression of the brainstem and creating that. The babies do it so they can learn to crawl, because it's the position from which you can turn over most easily. So they do it reflexively as a way of starting to learn to crawl. So that's
getting off their back onto their stomach, kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, right on.
That's what you're seeing. You're seeing that primitive reflex assert itself when the brainstem gets significant trauma.
So these reflexes are still wired in there, just long forgotten and disused. And
other things will be on top of them, right? Other systems will be masking them or have secondary inhibitory tone development as more tissues develop. What you're seeing is a failure of inhibition and a primitive. Right. This is one of the primitive, like the Mora or the grasping or the suckling.
Right.
This is the primitive reflex reasserting itself.
Right.
In a 300-pound guy who's hurtling through the air because he just got a bell rung,
Right.
So,
well, Jay will get on. He'll get going on this. So before he gets there, anybody want to take on what a concussion is for the lay people in here? The lay person in me says that your brain's getting hit one way and the brain is getting sloshed back the opposite way. What do you call that?
Usually.
Contra coup or something like that? Anybody want to take it?
Contra coup, exactly right.
Coup,
Andrew, you're ready to roll on that one.
Touch opposite touch. Coup contra coup.
Because we think of the brain because we see it so often on television. A guy in the morgue holding up a brain in his hand, and it looks like this sort of pretty hard object. And a dead brain kind of is, but a live brain not so much. It's much more fluid-like, jelly-like. I don't know what's a good word for it. I've never held a live brain in my hand, so I don't know.
And even those ones you see in the TV shows, or if you went to a lab where they use the same brains year after year to teach medical students,
Right.
those brains are firm because they're fixed with formaldehyde or formalin.
Exactly.
A dead brain is pretty sloppy. It is pretty like it's an organ.
Yeah.
And the human brain moves. It doesn't move as much as the heart, but almost. It like literally pulses and moves. 2 hertz waves of delta at night create these agitation waves to the brain, like a washing machine. A huge amount of physical ducting and movement and tissues we're just now figuring out in the lymphatic system. So yeah, it's not a very stable, still organ. It's probably a mercy we can't feel it.
Yeah. So you think about it encased in this hard skull, and then slosh that around, like, put something relatively fluid in a jar, put an egg in a jar, and then just throw it around for a while, see what happens. It's not pretty.
Getting back to Tua, 2 years ago, people didn't know, at least the people that I talked to in sports didn't know about the posturing and all that. Now parents know that if their kid gets hit in the noggin and they go like that or anything like that, they're like, you're not going back in the game. I don't care what happens.
That's not a mild concussion either. If you have a posturing response, a fencing response, reassertion of primitive reflexes, it is a major brain injury. There is bleeding, there is secondary inflammation. There's likely a lot going on, not just getting a concussion.
What is the difference between the two, Dr. Hill?
Between
the posturing and the fencing, or is it both the same? Because people reference both of them. Because
the primitive reflexes, different reflexes are all posturing, right? So you can have a symmetric tonic motor response, which is, again, you'll see these things in babies characteristically as healthy things, but babies will lift their arms up and stretch them, stretch their neck, and pull their legs up. And that's the symmetric one. It's to get ready to start to move. It's basically to crawl. And then there's the asymmetric one, which is the Elvis one, where you're doing your fencing posture, and that's so you can turn over. And those things go from reflexive into voluntary motor patterns as you mature. And the symmetric one usually matures out by the time you're born, actually. So it's only voluntary. But in preemies, you'll see it. You'll see the symmetric one, the involuntary crawling stretch. You'll see it in preemies up until they finish developing, basically. It's one of the signs that they're still preemies if they do that thing. So these are the primitive reflexes, the posturing mora, which is the suckling reflex, or the grasping reflex. They're all there. But then secondary systems either move them into more of a voluntary thing because they're inhibited, or they become part of a deeper motor pattern generally. So you're almost seeing a decorticate kind of phenomena. Decorticate phenomena from concussions are the big differences. A fencing posturing or posturing response is instant. You see it right away as the change in mechanical tissue happens. But with a swelling event, you then see the cortex gets kind of disengaged from deeper tissues, and you can have similar kinds of phenomena happen. You don't usually see a motor response the same way, but you might see torticollis or dystonias, which is the same thing. In a baby, you can create the fencing response reliably, who's below about 9 months of old, by taking one arm and bringing it out and turning their head. I think you can just turn their head in one direction, and the arms will do this by themselves, actually, usually. It's triggered by the neck turning, triggered by something in the neck happening. So it gives us a sense of why concussions can trigger, I think. So.
Hi, Dr. Murray. We're talking about football players getting their heads knocked around.
Once again. Yeah. American Gladiators. What do you say?
Would you let your kid be a prize fighter? Why are you letting your 14-year-old play football? What's wrong with you?
That's my issue, John. I'm 100% with you. When we're adults, we take calculated risk, okay? And if you're going to pay me $5 million a year, okay, and I might get injured, or, if you're a Formula One driver, there are many, many professions, and you're an adult and you make that choice yourself, then that's your choice.
Yep.
My issue is when we throw young children in here, when they do not have the proper development to make those rational choices, and we injure them. I know it's a very, very unpopular stance, but
I'm 100% behind you, Doc. 100%.
Mhm.
Yeah, but we also know that unless you train children young, they don't grow up to be as fine players, in terms of the training and the tuning.
Well,
If you really want to throw this further, is this a form of child abuse? I don't know. Like how extreme do we want to have this?
I have said that. I have said that publicly. That's my opinion. I think it's child neglect at the very least.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you got little kids playing soccer, cheerleaders, the sports you wouldn't think of, and they're the ones that are getting messed up worse than football.
Well, Pete, I think you have.
I don't know about worse than. I'm not sure about
Yeah.
worse. I'm not sure about worse than football. What was the stat on CTE for retired football players? 98%.
There's a stat for the football players. There's no stat for the cheerleaders. Ask around. I could
In
be
my
wrong.
experience, the biggest injury population is women who play soccer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially young women. That's the most injury prone sport that exists in my.
And they
experience.
banned the header.
Well, actually, the one of the things that a lot of people, we talk a lot about gender here and how gender has become political, but there are some very distinct physical differences in males and females. And one of the primary reasons, not just in football or soccer for females, but also in terms of car accidents and whiplash, are neck girth. We're much, much more elegant and elongated here. We don't have, the larger neck. So when you get that impact, it's a huge impact because we do not have the muscular protection to reduce the velocity of the hit. So if you are a parent or a coach working with young females, I don't know, do you really build up the neck muscles the way we do? And if you look at American football players, the running joke is they have no neck, and quite frankly, if you have no neck, you're more protected. Who can we think in terms of celebrities? Keira Knightley comes to mind because she was actually in a soccer. So I bounced back between soccer and football, but she was in a soccer movie as a soccer player. Now she's a mature woman, but as a young female, that's exactly the type of neck that you are going to get horrendously injured in a sport accident or regularly playing the sport the way you're coached to play as a young female. It's anatomy. It's basic anatomy, female to female, and of course, male to female. Andrew, you want to pipe in there, or?
Well, just that, we're sort of also operating in the dark, right? We don't have good tools for screening and catching injury. So one of the arguments sort of being alluded to here or framed is that it's inevitable, and it might be, and there may be some aspects of sport that we have to modify. I'm over the past 25 years of working with teenagers and adults, I'm seeing a huge drop off of American football at the teen level, below college level. Tons of people are just dropping out. Entire sports programs are closing in towns because there's just no kids to play football. And the football that is happening below the high school levels turned into touch football now. There's no longer contact football in most places. So I'm seeing that modification, that awareness of parents. I would also argue that, maybe these are sports where it's unavoidable. I don't know. And that's a long question. But what we don't have in place that we could have is reliable mechanisms for screening and catching phenomena. There's things that are like QEEGs that are used field side. There's an amazing device that Professor Mike Loosemore in the UK has developed, it's the bite guard sensor. And if you're a soccer player, a football player, and you head the ball or get a concussion in real time from the accelerometer and the bite guard, they model the accelerative force of the impact and on a computer show inside the brain where it's likely to have done based on the impact and make a real-time judgment about, no, out of play, too much force, based on the likelihood of later damage. And they've modeled it all out. It's amazing. So that kind of stuff, QEEGs for your kids every year, a sense of brain health, field side screening. We could be doing a lot more to catch, because we're also up against the dignity of risk here, right? We don't want to coddle our young people. They need to develop power, and we send them to sports because we also send them to war. right? That's sort of like we're creating powerful people. There's discipline. There's all kinds of cultural stuff. Probably are not going to drop contact sports out of our cultures. Just a hunch.
But the point being that there's something about football that I think is unique. It's inherent in its design that people are crashing into each other. That's not true in soccer. It's not true in, there's a bunch of sports where there are high levels of injury, but it's inherent in its design.
It's inherent
when
in
you
hockey.
got 2 300-pound guys racing each other, these guys are doing a 4.840. These two guys crash into each other.
Yeah.
It's not going to be pretty.
They're wearing armor. They're wearing armor.
Something we can do about this, though.
Nah. The brain doesn't have that armor. The brain doesn't have that armor.
So here's the thing on football, guys. So I read something recently that helmets may have increased the traumatic damage to the brain because now people are going at each other harder. It might be incentivizing it. And I think I even heard a friend who's a football fan said, oh yeah, they used to not be able to tackle a certain way. I don't remember what he said, but they weren't allowed to be quite as direct. On soccer, I posted in the chat. I've been posting stuff in the chat. Soccer players, except for goalkeepers, and that's important, are 3.5 times more likely to suffer neurodegenerative disease compared to the goalkeepers and the general population. It's greater even for defensive player. And I think what's happening is it's the heading. So we just need to get rid of heading. I mean,
one single.
I think I heard you kind of say under your breath, or we were yelling over you, but also hockey. This is a big one, in terms of Canada.
Well, you're meant to do core, body on body in hockey. It's like kind of the point.
The game can be played completely without smashing into the boards, etc. And many of us have just been like, I don't like hockey. I just don't like to see that type of the destruction and intentional harm. And the fact that the game can be played and enjoyed without it. So I think we also have to take some responsibility as fans, as communities, that they're like, as Anthony said, just take the heading out of soccer. The hockey takes away the violence, but the fans aren't interested. The fans actually go for the violence. So maybe we're just talking a lot more about ourselves as human beings.
Well, I mean, if you look at heading, just to back up for a second, we're all scientists, practitioner types. Sure. There's literature showing one single heading drill on a weekend at a high school. One single drill creates inflammatory markers in the brain and a drop in short-term memory equivalent to a concussion for 48 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
30 kids did one drill. They measured GABA metabolites. They measured short-term memory before and after, and the drop was equivalent to a concussion.
Unbelievable.
It went away in a couple of days. It didn't last the same way, but it looked like a subacute concussion, basically.
Yeah.
So,
well, if we also look at our stereotypes of athletes, going back, 1940s, 1950s, the athlete, and athletes were commonly thought to be poor performers scholastically, having a lot of ADHD, etc. I strongly argue that we have a lot of brain injury and cumulative brain injury. That we're just now, again,
probably also had undiagnosed ADHD and people that don't perform under high stimulus circumstances getting tracked into supportive academic environments otherwise. Probably some of that was happening.
So guys, I also post one that said that a majority of TBI goes undetected, but that doesn't mean it's not having effects. The last thing I posted was a study that says in the UK, a study of 617 supposedly healthy 40-year-olds found that TBI was the likely main culprit for depression and sleep problems. And so that's probably from their high school days. I mean, most people are not college athletes. So this is maybe affecting people 20 years later.
Yeah. Well, if you grew up where I grew up, and I literally used to skate to school in the winter. I had the joy of being on a canal, but my, nobody wore a helmet. One little voom, right on the back of your head, So there is this thing called life as well. But I think we probably have a duty now to know what we know, knowing what we know to eliminate the instigation or the possibility of these known injuries versus that stuff happens when children and adults play. So looping back to what we were saying before, we can do extreme danger to people's development and lack of resilience if we try and protect everybody from anything. But I think we want to really think about taking away the irresponsibility of known side harm.
Why do you have to get a physical every year? Why do
Sorry?
you have to get a sign? Why do you have to get a physical every year to get signed off on before you play a sport? I guess so you get a baseline. So why don't you get a baseline with an EEG, right?
Yeah.
How would you guys do it?
Well, we do that at any family of wealth. I mean, I hate to put this in socioeconomics, but we have a lot of individuals. They don't pursue a course of therapy. They come in, they want a baseline brain map just in case anything happens, whether that's a car accident or they know that their child is going to be playing sports. So they have a roadmap back to baseline health. I highly recommend that. If you're a family that can afford it, do it.
And Peak Brain does it cheaply.
Sorry?
So, Peak Brain does it cheaply. You don't have to be wealthy to get a Peak Brain.
Okay.
Did you? How would you do it though? What age?
What age?
Yeah,
depends on the goals. You can do brain mapping. I routinely do it as young as 6 months.
That's a hard sell. My kids
little tiny caps. I have little tiny caps. They're this big. They're really cute.
That's cute.
Seriously, kid, 5, 6 years old, whatever that is, when they're running around, they have no idea what they're doing. They're just running down the street following the ball. When should they get a baseline so you got something to compare it to in case they do get bonked?
I don't know. I mean,
as early as you see
fit. Developmental model. Before I kind of say that, before 5, you really got to put in your measures for age. And then, when we're talking about ADHD, learning disabilities, et cetera, 7 to 9 is when the brain is really fine tuning. And then, whether you have, a missed learning phase versus a true learning deficit. So if you really want solid traction of who and what a person is, I would say get them at 9. But I'm sure all of us here on the panel will say lots can happen before then. So, I mean, it depends, what is the purpose of the baseline, or Pete, as you were saying, and also Andrew, which is if you can afford it, get one every year, like a yearly physical.
Yeah, and you can see enough variability once developmental changes slow down across people. So that's about 6.5 years old.
Yeah.
At 6.5, there's enough stability that all the databases start to show up and show norms at that age that are really stable in behavior. And the kid generally is functional enough to have the ability to participate with assessments appropriately. You may want to, map or work on a kid who's 18 months old right after their parents got an autistic diagnosis and they're freaking out, because you can do something.
Yeah, different.
And if you're doing a longitudinal map, I like to do it when the first developmental phase slows down, which is at 6.5, and then do it again after the left-right hemisphere divide and the language divides. We're talking about like 9 or 10.
Yeah.
So when they're going to grade school, you'd recommend getting an EEG?
Yeah. A QEEG and a CPT side by side. Never one or the other. I strongly believe they should always be done together.
So if they play sports or looking out for a learning disability, it just seems like common sense. But
you don't have to do something about ADHD, but if you understand how your attention works or sleep or stress works, now you can scaffold behavior and strategies around support. So just knowing, it's just data. Just knowing how somebody's built can help a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a comment here. Jody Cohoot. Any thoughts on neurofeedback for olivopontocerebellar atrophy, OPCA?
Wow. Not familiar with that, but if it's pontocerebellar, it's going to not have pyramidal neurons as part of its physiology. Instead, it will you'll have a hard time affecting it with classic EEG neurofeedback because there's no EEG. So you'd have to do infra-low, infra-slow, or blood flow training. So my hunch is, what I would do is find somebody who works very, very well with POTS, with metabolic, with dysautonomia phenomena, because now we're talking about potentially life-threatening brainstem phenomena, and they may have some tools for helping. But my guess is you're talking about infra-low, infra-slow to affect that, if you can affect that with neurofeedback.
Anthony, can you read off VJs? We're trying to get caught up and we'll go back.
Yeah. Which parts of the brain do you find to be the source of meltdowns/shutdowns in autistic kids?
Everything.
Yeah, there's a few.
Yeah. Yeah. There are many. I think you're probably going to get a different perspective or different lens, I should say. None of them are going to be incorrect on this. I mean, one of my very strong theories on autism is you're looking at hyperarousal everywhere. Right. So bottom line is you can go in anywhere and in theory be able to assist with that. So this is where, again, the mapping is so important. There are some universal spots where, almost always location FZ is implicated in terms of rigidity. But other than that, it's very highly individualistic. I'm sure any of us could run with that. Who wants to take the ball now? Pun intended.
Well, you will see, it's also not just a different answer from each of us, but like you put 10 autistic people in a room and you got 15 different answers, based on their brains. Yeah. There's a lot of variability for the individual, but you will see in a classic autistic population with social deficit, this phenomena of emotional valence changing the laterality. So in non-autistic brains, socially intact cueing, when you show a lot of happy, exciting, yummy, appetitive phenomena, you get a left side light up of the amygdala. There's an activation of the left. And when you show a lot of adversive things and scary things and icky things, the right lights up. But if you have somebody who's got an classic autistic presentation with social deficits, any intense emotion, good or bad, lights up the right one. Right. So you have this asymmetric, lateralized avoidance phenomena. It's a stress phenomena caused by intense social input. Yeah, like Dr. Swingle said, you're talking about parietal areas for the sensory and the social, frontal areas for the conflict resolution, precentral areas for inhibitory tone. So it's kind of everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So and just going really positive here, that this is also why I would say neurofeedback is one of the most successful interventions for change in the population with autism, because there's so much we can see and so many venues for brain change or entry into a therapeutic process. So
KYM, what would be a good way of finding your ideal threshold? Should you first find your baseline threshold and then set a reward inhibit from ?
That works. Yeah, you set you measure the signals, measure the parameter, the thing you're trying to train, let it stabilize, and it should kind of hang out in a certain amplitude. If it's a amount of brainwave, for instance, or if it's a speed, it should stabilize in a range. And then you can parameterize as a function of that, as a percentage of that. A very classic way to do it. It works just fine.
Yeah. And I would say if you want to up your game, never do automatic, do manual, because you'll find that some individuals will be significantly more responsive at a different percentage. Very, very important.
We have another one from VJ. Yeah. Pete, I can go. Or he says, VJ says, how does dissociative identity disorder show up in QEEGs?
Hey, where's Jay when you need him?
There. Seriously, it's very strange. You actually can get a different QEEG signature based on alters. I've worked a lot with DID just in inpatient crisis environments, and I eventually saw a brain. And it's a very loaded topic, DID, right? Like there's some question of does it exist, and is it a real thing? And I've worked with lots of people that have that diagnosis, and I still don't know. Yeah. But I will say, I've seen lots of brain maps, or a handful of brain maps of people with different alters presenting, and you see different things in the brain. I've seen different attention laterality. I've seen handwriting shift. You've seen different hemispheres going to dominant alpha speeds. So I don't know what it is, but I would say that if anything, VJ, the QEEG might not be a good tool for DID because it breaks the assumptions of QEEG, which are that we're picking up traits, not states. Yeah. I did a bunch of brain maps recently on a psychic. Psychics keep finding me. It's kind of funny. I have psychics who are all the time finding me now. And I have this pet psychic who channels pets. You know, she reads your pet for you and tells you what's happening. And she did a brain map for a fun experiment and did 2 different channeling experiences and altered her brain. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. And she did a bunch of neurofeedback with us, and then did another experiment looking at baseline change, like you do with brain maps, and did her exercises again for her little channeling experience. And she changed her brain the exact same way voluntarily the second time 2 months later. Really rare to be able to change your EEG by doing something with your mind. And yet people can do it sometimes. And that is sort of, I think what's happening in DID is such a huge state shift that you're getting a trait marker shift, but I don't understand it.
I got a quickie. How close are we to using automatic artifact removal with all the software out there? Or do we have to just going through the EEG, taking out bad data? How close are we to saying, okay, let me just hit the automatic button? Or do we have to
get to QEEG bitmaps or something else? I'm
just saying to clean it. You have software out there that says
here. Pete's pushing my buttons. I'll jump. I am very, very, very anti artifacting programs. You miss so much. In fact, a lot of the work that I'm known for is I study the outlier. Study many things that look like artifact or look odd that we remove, and you can find some really fascinating things, especially for your last resort clients. So there is information in the unknown variables, and just because note my term, that it's an unknown variable, not necessarily an artifact. Now, I'm not talking about 60 cycle or 50 cycle interference. Let's just get that out of the way. But I think, pardon the judgment, but those of us who really, really are good at our game do it manually, or we watch as the automatic programs do it, and we'll bring things back in or put other things out. So I'm not against the combo, but if you just want to press a button and do it, like you're missing so much, if not doing your job well.
So we're not
talking about.
No, I like your idea, Mari.
Data or cleaning data with ICA. That's another hot button topic. Like I'm not a huge fan of doing mathematical modifications to get clean data, but I'm okay with running a threshold, amplitude threshold, or blink threshold through some automatic software to tag it, and then visually scanning it to make sure it didn't do something wrong. Exactly. But you have to match the EEG to the same analysis methods of the findings you're looking for always. So it's, it ends up being always imperfect. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there an open source where all this data can go? We have all these EEGs that are done.
Not now.
Well, a lot of it is just garbage. I'm not going to name certain software products, but you're getting all kinds of things dumped in, and we have 5 million EEGs of what?
No. You mean with the top hertz of 30?
Yeah. You want to translate for people, John?
No.
So they don't get the joke. They shouldn't be in the biz.
I'm not looking for a lawsuit.
That's a good point. The disclaimer, please check with your primary care physician first. This is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The HD recorder says, how effective are BioExplorer and BioEra CO?
They're not effective. They're programs. You have to use
they work fine, but they work,
either of them.
I have strong opinions. I've used BioExplorer a lot, and they're really good tools, but they're not easy to use.
No.
BioExplorer is super long in the tooth, has some issues because of it. It runs on several layers of cruft and translation and timing. So you can break the training process and make it go away if you don't have a good Windows computer and you've done too much with the software, but it works okay. BioEra works better, but it's not runnable out of the box. It's meant to build other pieces of software with, which is what Signet is. And there's a couple in Germany that use BioEra as their underpinnings. So they're a step, in my opinion, they're a step up from things like OpenEEG and OpenBCI, BCI 2000 and MATLAB for rolling your own. But you kind of have to already know how to do neurofeedback. to do all those roll your own things. And I'm a big fan of like, just buy the software that works and gets out of your way. It doesn't cost you that much. And then you can not worry about the software, because there's no really, we get this question every week, every one of us gets this question. What's the best device? What's the best software? I can do really good neurofeedback with almost anything that gives me the option to make control decisions of what's happening.
Right.
And somebody who doesn't know how to do neurofeedback can't do neurofeedback with the best tool set.
Right.
Well, Dr. Andrew, 80% of your biz is remote. Like, what's the easy? You gotta have to have something easy. So what do you use?
I use Eager because it gets out of the way. It's pretty straightforward. It's a granddaddy in the field at this point, and it's relatively, kept up so it doesn't overcomplicate. I do make some sacrifices, like I haven't gotten into infra-slow or infra-low. I don't do Z-score training, mostly because the efficacy I haven't found to be all that better in that with those tools. So I haven't bothered to use them. But Eager is a tool that other software, VJ agrees, other providers have learned their neurofeedback chops on, and it's a tool set that Howard Lightstone, for years, he would go to all the meetings every year and talk to providers and say, "What are you trying to do? What would you like to do?" And he would do like market research at all the conferences every year, go back and develop every winter, and would have new software with these really bizarre features. So if you dig around in Eager, it's got these like Swiss Army knife bits where you're like, what does that tool do? I've never seen that tool before. But if you want to do something, like Rob Coben's 4-channel multivariate coherence, or complicated, sum and difference channel training, classic stuff, you can do it. And Eager gives you the signal on the screen, and it gives you threshold, and it shows the metaphors of training in a very straightforward way. And that's important when teaching somebody about thresholding or signal quality or filtering or game triggering. It's important that it be simple enough. And that may be some of the complaints I have around some of the BioEra built software packages, is they don't actually expose enough of the process sometimes to the individual. And they're great for the one thing, the one screen, the IP, the special sauce that they're exposing, but they don't necessarily create a tool set that's broad. I mean, at one point, Signet had regular band training in it. You could do alpha, theta, band training, or infra-low kind of stuff. But nowadays, it's just the infra-low stuff, basically. So it's more business that's doing that than the actual tools. But I just use Eager. So VJ is an Eager user as well. He's given some props to Eager. I don't own Eager. I just use it. I may be their biggest customer because I have so many clients using it. I don't know, but
sounds like they need to have some Patreon love.
Lose some friends and make some enemies here, but I find that the better equipment you really, or the best equipment, you really need to know your craft to use it. And I think we've said this before, that we're kind of lacking the simpler, reliable, valid, that has good reliability and good validity. So that's the bane of our discipline, I'd say, to this day.
Well, we have another question from VJ. He's keeping us going here.
Thank you, VJ.
Yeah, thanks, VJ. He said, I'm curious if people could talk about psychedelics and mental health. Or she. Well, I think VJ is probably male, but we'll see. If you could all talk about psychedelics and mental health and how neurofeedback can interact with it. I've noticed multiplicative effect in trauma.
And emotional processing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Is it a plasticity answer? Is that what we think? What do you guys think? Some of you are more in the therapeutic, clinical space than I am.
I'm going to put my qualification here that I am very much not just on the fence. I'm not into this stuff. I've seen a lot of people just report it's changed their world, and I've also seen the other extreme that people go into, psychosis, episodic psychosis, and never recover. So it's so much in their infancy, and these are our brains. I don't agree with playing with them. We don't know enough. Now, that's my qualifier. Now, one of the things, I wish Jay Gunkelman were here, because he can share and show some data. But what I think is happening with a lot of these things is we get a scrambling effect. And for some people with very, very severe depression, severe anxiety, etc., you give the brain a good scramble and it resettles back somewhere better. But I think with other people, you give the brain a good scramble and it resettles somewhere worse. And I don't know what the percentages are, but of course, we're hearing a lot more about the ones that are the positive rescramble. And I don't know whether that's a marketing effect or it really is helping a lot of people. But, many of these things as well, if you just go on a good high with a really nice person holding your hand, especially, there's certain classes of the psychedelics that just help with a lot of positive emotionality. And if you're having a lot of difficulty accessing the positive and you have a supportive individual helping you access it, I get why some people are into it. But I'm a middle-aged conservative. I was going to say an old conservative. I'm not there yet. I've just seen too much damage.
It's also not just the really, quote unquote, party drug psychedelics that are moving now into therapeutic usage. You can go to Reddit and look at a whole subreddit on damage caused by lion's mane because it's bringing up plasticity too high and you're getting indiscriminate plasticity, resulting in what looks a lot like post-SSRI effects and anhedonia and depersonalization simply by bringing up plasticity super high. So indiscriminate plasticity isn't really something you need. And generally, we don't need more. If you do meditate, do neurofeedback, do an ice bath, etc., those are more controllable. Yeah. I do think, VJ, there is some role for psychedelics in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy for trauma. I think that's a very interesting place. Here in LA, there's a lot of that going on with psychotherapists using MDMA or using psilocybin for guided psychotherapy. And I've had lots of people over the years map their brain before and after their Burning Man or they're this or they're that. And you don't see a lot of after effects. If somebody escapes damage from a drug of abuse or a drug of party later on, you don't see any effect. Oh, I used heroin 20 years ago a lot. I
actually have them. Andrew, I've seen massive diffuse alpha sitting around.
Sometimes I can see. And when someone goes through psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, I sometimes see them go through massive healing trajectories in a weekend, as if they've done rebuilding of their brain over years and years. It's rare. And most of the time when someone looks for those effects, don't see it in the EEG. And they're like convinced. Like, well, how you feel doesn't really impact the EEG at this level. I know, but I've had a life-transforming experience. Everything is glowing. And like, looks like you're a little more awake.
Guys, maybe Jay, it is bad that Jay's not here because he likes to talk about, I've heard from him several times, that if you have beta spindles present in the EEG or subclinical epileptic discharges, you're more likely to have a bad trip and you are more likely to have adverse negative long-term events. Yeah. And I do see, to back up Mari, I have met individuals who told me my brain has never been the same since I touched LSD. That is one that I hear that often about. I think Jay has even said the arousal level matters more with LSD. I think I've heard him say. And the other thing I want to say is there was just a big trial that came out. I'll post it in the chat. It's from Medscape. It said that these antidepressants, the psychedelics, have about like a 54% response rate. I just shared it. What they said is, that's better than antidepressants, but it's not that much better. Martijn Arns, when he presented at Sassoon last year at Jay's conference, he even showed, even when you use a biomarker, an EEG biomarker to match it, we don't know all of them yet, but when he used one, basically he said all these treatments like TMS, antidepressants, psychedelics, ketamine, they all cluster around 50%. Even when he used his biomarker, he said it's kind of interesting. I don't know why that is. Anyway, just that was the research I wanted to get out there.
Yeah. The other thing is the stick factor. Just in terms of how long people supposedly feel better. It doesn't have a big stick factor.
Really, I've heard the opposite. I've heard that when they test people, say up to 6 months, even 1 or 2 years, that they're still reporting. Now there's a range, but I've heard 6 months fairly consistently, Mari.
Okay. Yeah, our frame, Anthony, is decades.
Well, yeah, I'm not encouraging for the record people go out and use that.
That's our goal. Our goal here is decades long sticking factors.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've heard around 3 months and then it's gone. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, here's a great question Dr. Marie will like. Will things like neurofeedback completely get rid of ADHD, or does it just help you deal with it better?
Well,
sure, both.
Yeah.
Depends.
Yeah. But the panel is in unison. Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, sure.
Yeah, we don't want to change personality, right? We want to help, people to pay better attention, to be able to do what they want to do. But there's certain components of quote unquote ADHD that can, this curiosity, this innovation is fabulous. You don't want to change that. What you want to do is change the ability to follow through on that curiosity and innovation, right?
Hey, football edit, here's a little secret just between us. I put an early link to tomorrow's show where Jay Gunkelman does an hour screen share on ADHD. Don't tell anyone. It's just for you. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, VJ's
a little more discreet though. You can reliably get a couple of standard deviations of improvement in impulsivity and in attention reliably across people most of the time in core features that are not the diagnosis of ADHD, but are some of the core resources that do get stuck. It is reliable across people. It does usually change. It does usually stay changed. It can just take a few months to get there. But to credit what Dr. Mari said, the psychosocial aspects of ADHD are more subtle than that. And you may still have this procrastination and rejection sensitivity and some other aspects that are not quite as straightforward as gross resources of executive function. But you can change the executive function if you need to.
What I like to share with my clients is, generally speaking, we get around a 50% change. And for most people, 50% is more than enough to achieve everything you need to or want to achieve scholastically so that you can go on tickety-boo. The other thing about that is, well, you don't want to be in therapy for years and years and years and years, especially if you're a child, because you're really going to start to believe something is wrong with you. My favorite ADHD client is a client that you see for a certain short period of time. And when you meet the family coincidentally or whatnot, 10 years later, the child has no idea who the heck you are and that they ever had a problem. That is my ideal ADHD client.
Absolutely.
I'll go one step further. The client that never even knew they were ADHD and came in because they were distracted and you never had to diagnose them and you just taught them how their brain worked and helped them move it, and they felt empowered because they just got more control over their brain by looking at it. That's one step even beyond the brief intervention, I would say, just to give a little plug.
Let's get into our beautiful stories. I mean, I've worked with children that have come in for ADHD or learning deficits, and you see these like, oh my gosh, talk about frontal lobe deregulation. And what that's going to start to look like in adolescence if that liability hasn't expressed itself. But to be able to go in and correct that before it expresses itself, wow, is there a power there? Because we know what they avoided. Nobody else does, but we know. It's powerful.
Talking on BioEra or BioExplorer, when are you guys going to do on how you should use with, KYM? Probably not, but we will hook you up with somebody who will know something about it. Unless you want to do a screen share on how to use the product. Is that what KYM's asking for, Anthony?
Yeah, I think so. They want a how-to, but that's up to you.
The thing is, learning how to use the software doesn't teach you to do neurofeedback.
Right.
I can teach you to set up a protocol in BioExplorer or Eager or BrainMaster or J&J. Go back a little bit. Anything you want.
Why does all those interfaces look like they're built by engineers?
They are.
Because they were.
Yeah, I mean, all the neurofeedback is cutting edge, circa 1985, basically at this point.
Yay, Excel! Yay, Excel!
It really does look like Google wrote the code, and it's just engineer.
Well, we have no pressure on the marketplace to build something better. It's a niche.
Yeah.
It's expensive. You don't buy lots of copies. I mean, I buy hundreds of copies of Eager a year, and that's weird. Like I'm a weird outlier in the field. Most, so there's no real pressure. How many copies does Howard Lightstone or Lars sell of Eager a year total? What's the install base? A few thousand? What's the install base that Tom Kalura has for Brainmaster? A few thousand? How many copies of NeuroOptimal are out there? There's just not a lot of pressure in the marketplace to create better software. And so if you can charge $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 for a single license and people buy it, there's no real pressure. So I think that's what's happening. It's much easier to make hardware and software now than it was a few years ago. And the hardware side is caught up, where you can get an amp now for a few $100 that's as good as an amp was for a few thousand, 20 years ago. The software is the same software as it was 20 years ago. There's almost no movement, and there's no market pressure. We need someone who has vision or who's that? Hungry to take the marketplace over.
Now, Andrew, you got me thinking here now. AI evidently can write code. I don't know squat about writing code. And I understand some coder says, oh, AI will write a hell of a piece of code for you.
It can, yeah.
I'm wondering if that's a potential.
You know what to ask it.
Well, that's what believe me, I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy to ask
one of
the
those
question.
things where you have to know how to build the thing to build it without writing code. You have to know how to write the code to build it anyways.
Yeah. And data, garbage in, garbage out. That's my issue with AI as well. Like, what is AI building the code upon as well, right? We've got to be really cautious about that. Yeah. I'm going to get on my soapbox again, just in terms of, a lot of the programs that are coming out, the software, it looks really good. It looks really, 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 really pretty and really, really, really flashy. But I'll take my orders any day.
KYM, I'm just blowing you a little crap. Don't worry about it. You should see my grammar. All right, I've worked with Dr. Hill on this, but have any of the other people been able to talk about meditation and neurofeedback and how they can amplify each other?
Yeah.
That's some VJ. VJ's busy today.
Well, any of us could take it. I mean, the answer is yes, yes, and yes.
I noticed VJ's really into amplification. Like it's not enough to do one therapy. He wants to, multiply. But go on, guys.
He has your number, VJ. Anthony has your number.
Well, I mean, right at the beginnings, one of the key things that this was used for is to figure out how can we get, normal people to get their brains in the states that yogis took 30 years to get. We could have a person get there in 30 days. So you bet, when you can literally be on a feedback loop to see where your brain is going, you can really potentiate meditative states, hugely so. Now, this is another one where people might disagree. I also clearly can identify individuals where meditation would be torture. And I tell them, don't do it. You're not wired this way. I say there are certain individuals who need quiet to quiet, and then there are other individuals who need arousal to quiet. And many of us busy brain people, sitting in a room, okay, I'm exaggerating a bit. That's an element of torture, right? So know who you are, and know if a state of quiet is really, really helping to calm the autonomic nervous system, et cetera, or if it's actually that level of quiet is contributing to your arousal. Had to put some spice in there.
No, very spicy. Anthony, you got that one?
Well, I heard, this is a new one. Just real quick, I heard Nikki Whitridge again say at AAPB one time, he said he thinks that maybe people who are high performers, they get into a meditative state and it raises their high beta, they're perfectionists. That's what it was. And so he's wondering if the pressure they treat meditation like it's a task, and you've told them to perform it, so they have to do it perfectly. So I'm wondering if those are the people who get over aroused. To speak to Stan's question here, what do you
That's
think
why
about
Nikki can't sleep.
What? Yeah.
Exactly.
What do you think about doing low-level laser therapy before or after a neurofeedback session?
I'm not biting this one. Any of you?
Do you mean actual lasers, or are we talking infrared LEDs?
Yeah, low-level lasers can be a little bit unpredictable. That's the problem. It's like you're doing a lot, and Lens makes a low-level laser device now as a secondary stimulation device for doing laser light, and you can do some weird things with laser light. I don't know. I think it's probably a little bit unpredictable. both John and I, maybe others here, will use photobiomodulation, red light
Sure.
therapy.
Yeah.
And I do that before. I use it kind of like I use
Yeah,
HEG
what's
or
the difference between the two?
Well, photobiomodulation is streaming red light into the brain in this case. And it's 10, depending on the device, it runs between 1100 and up to about 1800 nanometers. And most of them are 1170, 1180, so red light. And the theory is, and I think there's some good science here, is that the red light in that frequency range interacts with the cytochrome receptor or something in the mitochondria and causes the electron transport chain to spin faster. So essentially, you goose the production of ATP by giving red light to the tissue. And several of the devices out there go a lot further than just that basic stimulation of red light, and will do entrainment-driven stuff or quadrant-driven stuff. And John and I are both playing with those devices clinically, supporting people. And I'm getting really interesting, strong potentiated effects when people combine those two, combine PBM and neurofeedback. It's very similar to how you can accelerate effects when you combine neurofeedback with hyperbaric medicine or with HEG or with some other technology. So
I'm still,
Andrew, very well.
Yeah, Andrew, just directly to that point, I still struggle with, is a couple of times a week putting the helmet on somebody's head really that effective?
I don't think
I've asked the people who make the machine, they go, oh, hell yeah. And I'm like, part of me is
well, for you and I, maybe, because we're priming the system and then training the system. So we might be able to get somewhere. But no is a short answer. I mean, it's kind of like neurofeedback, where it really should probably be 3 times a week. And my clients I'm combining it with, at this point, I'm having all the clients who want to do photobiomodulation just purchase their own device, because they usually have to have a big enough reason for it, either peak performance or suffering, where they're going to need it for a long time. Right. I'm having them use it 4 or 5 days a week. I have some clients using it twice a day.
Right.
But I have other clients that I have to ease in. They get overtrained by it. Mix it with neurofeedback exhausts them. So there's still a pretty wide range of responses, even with a gentle stimulation.
Feed-light neuronic. Thanks, Dan. It's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, let's hear a little bit on overtraining as well. Like, that's one of the overt, I would say, dangers of a lot of home protocols.
For sure.
Whether vitamins, home vitamins, how many do you take before you can actually poison yourself with the vitamins?
Yeah, if 1,000 milligrams is good, 3,000's got to be better.
Yeah.
Well, I had a client who was taking N-acetylcysteine. She's like, oh my God, this stuff's amazing. Thank you for pointing out my brain map that I had this anterior cingulate. NAC is amazing. And she started taking more and more of it because it was so awesome. And she was one of those rare people with a sulfur metabolism issue. And after about 2 weeks was like nauseated and feeling really activated. Wow. And NAC is like the most innocuous substance out there used for cognition, but every so often, things don't mix. And so more is not always better.
Just to get back to Stan, more can be not good. So you gotta we ease into this, and I'm sure Andrew you do the same thing. You start slow, do a couple of minutes of just glow, just the basic non-pulsated, see how the client feels about it. You ask them afterwards, you ask them the next day, next session, and just sort of ease into perhaps frequency-based pulsations.
It's a tough one. This is going to be a free-for-all here. Whoever's got the best salesperson.
Learn how to read the brain maps. That's all.
Just start with that. Yeah.
You can use any tool. You can do any flavored neurofeedback. You can do any. You can adapt your style to be skillful under any circumstances if you understand the brain adequately, and you will be forever locked into recipe books and silly pieces of software if you don't.
Who do I give my $1,500 to?
Get a mentor.
Get a mentor, do IQCB or the School of Neurotherapy, go get a PhD. Look at a lot of raw EEG. Look at a lot of raw signals. It's weird,
I think that's the key. Once you learn the raw EEG, then I support the liberty to, I was going to say play with anything, but I think everybody here knows me. I'm not saying play, but you can really use any piece of equipment once you know what you're doing, right? So that's what I'm saying. Get a good mentor who will teach you to know what you're doing, and then the world's your oyster.
How do you get a good mentor, though? You go to Google and there's sponsored ads all over the place. You don't know what the hell you're doing. It's who do I give my $1,500 to, and who do I pay $200 an hour to mentor me? How do I find it?
Towards BCIA mentors, there's a base level of knowledge testing there, and I would also see, what names are popping up that don't use Bach's program. What names are popping up who don't say you don't need to know what you're doing to do this.
Right, that's a bad sign when someone says you don't have to understand the brain to do the training.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a red flag, perhaps. Yeah. No, I think the same names circulate in terms of master trainers or master practitioners. And all of us have slightly different methods and slightly different pieces of equipment, and our favorites. We all have favorites. I mean, I share very openly. I'm an amplitude and primarily an amplitude trainer, and frequency trainer.
Yeah, he says. Is there any relation between beta hypercoherence and intelligence? Seems like every high performer in tech has some symptoms of Asperger's.
Absolutely.
There is a relationship between sped up alpha and beta hypercoherence. Yeah, and fast alpha is one of the biggest drivers of IQ. So it's there, but it's not causative. You can have fast alpha without having beta hypercoherence. You can have beta hypercoherence without having fast alpha, but they are correlated. There's a way to get from one to the other.
Yeah, we have to be really, really cautious. I'm going to go to the other end. It's like every addict is walking around with a whole lot of beta in the occipital region. Okay. But majority of elite athletes also are, because it can be turned into drive. So, when you're 13 years old, what is around you? What hook does that beta catch? If that hook catches heroin versus if that hook catches soccer, right? Or swimming or something. The other thing is most of, I would say high performers have, really, really high beta ratios. Okay. And if you don't have an objective, you're just extreme OCD. But if you do have a project and an objective, you write programs and books and whatnot in 4 or 6 months. So, I kind of talk about, be careful what you wish for. If we talk about like the same brainwave pattern, we can see an extreme productivity as well as an extreme anxiety. So it's a really, this is why I'm a true believer. Yeah, we follow our normative databases and our clinical databases, but you also have to look at what the person is doing. And if that brain works with their lifestyle, if that works with their family dynamic, et cetera, and be really, really cautious about what you train up and what you train down for what objective or what purpose. It's not just a science, it's an art in that regard.
We're at time, everyone. I'm sure you guys are pounding the table and are very unhappy. John Mekrut, Anthony Ramos, Dr. Marie Swingle, and Dr. Andrew Hill. All your contact information will be in the details. Okay, VJ. Okay, hold on. DJ says, just want to give a moment of thanks. Suffered a lot in my life. PTSD, autism, psychosis, neurofeedback change, and saved my life. Bless you all for contributing to this field. VJ, thank you, my friend. We're trying to get the word out. Who knows what Google's algorithm's going to trip over? Maybe this will say, Tua's concussion. Hey, look at what they're talking about.
That's right. Hopefully it's VJ was on. My God, I got to watch that video. VJ's on it. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions.
And then the panelists, we do the show tomorrow. If anybody's interested, Jay will be around tomorrow. Dr. Marie, hopefully you'll be around. We're using that show to do a continuation of this show. So if there are any questions that pop up, we'll address more of them there.
Sounds good.
Everybody have a great night. Thank you so much. Peace be with y'all.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning into this special edition of NeuroNoodle Q&A Live. We hope you found the session informative and insightful. Remember, if you'd like to join us for the next live Q&A, we go live every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time on the NeuroNoodle YouTube channel. It's your chance to ask your questions directly and shape the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the NeuroNoodle podcast on your favorite platform to stay updated on all things neurofeedback and brain health. And one last reminder, the content provided in this Q&A is for informational entertainment purposes only. Always consult with your primary care physician or a qualified healthcare provider before making any decisions related to your health. Thanks again for listening and watching. We'll catch you in the next episode.